Welcome to episode 40 of Constructing Comics, a podcast building stories one page and one panel at a time. On this episode, we are going to do our first character spotlight. We're going to start with Moon Knight. We're going to start and focus on breaking down Moon Knight through the decades, how he was written and who was drawn, and take a look at the way some of the different creative teams tackled Moon Knight. So this is a slight spoiler from Moon Knight as we talk about these series. We may touch on some plot points, and in some of our images, we may spoil some things. So this is Matt, and I'm joined by my co-host Noah.
Hey there.
So Noah, why don't you lead us off with some of your thoughts on Moon Knight? The character, some of the creative teams, and I guess maybe like how the creative teams tackle Mark Spector and his multiple personalities.
Yeah, I think Moon Knight's one of those underrated characters. He's probably becoming one of my all-time favorites in the last couple of years, mainly because of the Lemire run, and then also recently Max Bemis and Jason Burrows' run on Moon Knight has been incredible. I think, you have a character that sort of gives the writer a lot of freedom to experiment with styles and to mess with sort of surreal comic art. And I think from what I can tell, that's sort of how it's been since the beginning. He's sort of always been a character that just sticks around and no one knows why. Excuse me. And he's always been that character that's sort of like, maybe at some points people tried to make him the DC's Batman, but like he's too nuts for that. Like he's just too insane for him to be anything but just sort of a real vehicle for comic artists to experiment under a big title like Marvel. But that's my thoughts on Moon Knight. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, sort of like thinking like with the writer's perspective, there's a lot that you can play with what's real, what's not real. You can set up a lot of cliffhangers and play with the multiple personalities. So that brings a lot of different aspects to it. And as we discuss this, I think we'll see that. So I think that's like I said, thinking about it like as a writer would, that's a lot of like the intrigue that the character brings.
Yeah, definitely. And the artists and writers, it seems on it, just have fun writing the character. Because with Moon Knight, he's insane, which means, Deadpool can be self-referential and stuff like that, but he still exists within the Marvel universe.
Mm-hmm.
Especially in the Lemire and Smallwood run, like they push the character to new levels of like time and space, where like at times his mental illness transcends all of that, and it's incredible. It's like Alan Moore writing, but it's like the Alan Moore character of the Marvel universe, where the character can just travel and break all the rules of comic book writing and everything like that. And you can have things where like on the Lemire run, and then most recently on the Bemis run, you can switch between art styles and it matches with what the story is. So Moon Knight's personalities can be represented by different artists and their different styles, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and unique take was the Brian Michael Bendis Malieve, where he's set something up and then sort of at the end of the first issue revealed that none of that stuff was really true. So that was a different take on it, because like some of the other writers that you were talking with, Lemire would play with this is happening, but
right.
this is really crazy. Like, is this really happening, or is this a figment of his imagination? With the
Right.
Bendis run, he didn't really introduce anything that was out of the realm of possibility. It seemed like a straightforward, almost like detective story. But then he had the reveal. And again, we mentioned spoilers. In the Bendis run, he was teamed up with Cap, Wolverine, and Spider-Man. And you get to that last page, I believe on the first issue, where he's talking to those guys and you sort of pan back and they're not there. So
Yeah.
he had been hallucinating. So that was a different way to approach the is this really happening? Brian Michael Bendis didn't present it like anything that was out of the ordinary, and then sort of hit you with a trick at the end. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of reveals like that now with even the most recent run with Max Bemis. He would have like multiple reveals of that throughout all these different issues, where he would have it at least at the end of each issue, he would have a new twist of like, you thought this was real, but now, yeah, like psych, it was fake the whole time, that kind of thing. Or uh, with him being a multiple personality uh, character with like, multiple identities, that makes him unpredictable and it makes each of his personalities unpredictable. So
Hmm.
adding that variable into it, and even in the Bendis run where one of his personalities is Wolverine and one of them is Captain America and one of them is Spider-Man, he's unpredictable as well. So that's something that's been cool in most recent years where it's like there's this unpredictability with his that's inherent in his character, and the writers really use that to the advantage of like he doesn't know what all his personalities are up to all the time,
Hmm.
and then therefore we as the audience and readers don't know either, which is really cool.
Yeah. So let's move into a little bit more into some of the art styles and the choices made by these creative teams. Um, Early on in the 70s, uh, he appears in August of 1975 in Werewolf by Night number 32. I don't know a lot about the Werewolf by Night run, but that's where he got his start.
Yeah, and I haven't read much of the original stuff. I've read some of the Sienkiewicz run, and I'll pull up some images here really quick. Um, the what I realize is that basically he's sort of like Wolverine in that way, where he was supposed to be sort of a throwaway character, and then eventually it turned into something where people were like, "Oh, this guy is actually something people want to read more about," and then uh, then he got into like having his own backup story, his own B story, and certain things, and then you know, from then on, he's just sort of been one of those characters that just has hang on to a series by the skin of his teeth, or has had like years where he doesn't have a series or anything like that. Um, what's if I can get up my screen share to start working here, I can pull up some cool images done by the original artist. You can see from the beginning that they always tried to go for surreal, um, some surreal imagery always from the beginning. Can you see my screen, Matt?
Yep, you're up.
Okay, great. What's cool about, yeah, like from the beginning, you always had these crazy visual styles. Can you see this right here
Yeah,
on the
that's
big screen?
yeah.
Great. So from the beginning, you've always had these like really accentuated, cartoony looking characters that even Sienkiewicz went on to like further have in his comics. So you'd
Hmm.
have these like, of course, the Marvel method, but like the really dynamic. But there's even something to go like a step further with Moon Knight, where his like proportions and his poses are even more outlandish and ridiculous.
Hmm.
And that seems to be something that's been around since the beginning. Also, from the beginning, you've had a very, very consistent costume design with the hood and the suit, even to the gauntlets and the boots, and his like Moon Knight batarangs, I guess. Um, what I like about this work is also that um, the inks are very like there's high contrast inks, which is very common to the Marvel time period, where there
Hmm.
wasn't too much distinguishing between the blacks on something that's white as the blacks that's something that's brown, you know. And later in the series you get into more of that, of like how different artists play with that character that's mostly white. How do they draw him? How do they draw shadows on him that make him stand out? Because his costume is something of a mystery as to how it works in light and whatnot. But I've always liked how to see how different artists make him work in a cool design sort of way. I love this panel right here where he announces himself, and it's just black and white. There's no midtones really or anything like that. It's just solid black and white. And Greg Smallwood does that to some extent later in his books as well, where it's just pure white. pure black, that kind of thing. And there might be some gradients, but it's just black and white. Yeah, I love those designs.
Yeah. So what I'm really noticing here is that they put him in a lot more shadow
Yeah.
here than they do, say, like with the Declan Shalvey art, where he's white and he almost like pops out of the page, that he's
Yeah.
so out of place. But here they do a lot to sort of mask that all white uniform in shadow.
Yeah, they render him a lot more in the cover, which I don't like as much as what they do later with him. But on that panel, he definitely pops as being just straight black and white. Not like that. It looks like it's recolored maybe for a different collection. So I'd like to find maybe an original print to see how they handled Moon Knight. But
Mhm.
it's cool to see like maybe his roots. Now this is the Sienkiewicz stuff. So this was Werewolf by Night. First page was Werewolf by Night, where he first showed up, and he
Okay.
was in 2 issues of that at the beginning, where he was hired by an agency to kill the werewolf, but then by the end, him and the werewolf team up to fight the committee that hired him to kill the werewolf. Then he
Very.
went on to have a B story in the Hulk.
That's kind of cool. That's a very classic, Bronze Age Marvel to have two heroes. I mean, and at this point, they probably didn't have him set up as a hero, but you'd had that, two characters meeting, fighting, then joining forces, which is a trope that we'll see a lot in Marvel comics.
And it's very common to the age because like Wolverine was that way, Punisher was that way. A lot of Marvel characters who were of like at one point, Black Widow was that way, characters that were sort of villains, eventually become heroes of their own stories if they have a novel enough background. And from what I understand, in the Werewolf by Night, he was just Mark Spector, the Moon Knight.
Okay.
When it got into the Hulk, they started introducing all the different personalities, like Jake and Stephen Grant. All those characters were introduced in this run with Bill Sienkiewicz on pencils and inks. And here you can still see the like very dramatic poses that are very common with Sienkiewicz's work.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he colored these panels on the side here, these three, but they look very colored. They look colored by Sienkiewicz as well. Here you start to get into maybe like, finding interesting ways to render Moon Knight. I like how he blends into the sky with the moon in the background.
Yeah.
And then even on this page with the intro splash with the title, he blends into the sky with the shadows being the stars. And that, I think that goes to show again, like how artists can really be creative with how they draw the costume. It's kind of like Batman in a way where, artists experiment with how Batman silhouettes when the bat's like, in a bat shape. And this one, it's more like how he blends into the night and how he blends in with the moon and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah, the image, the smaller image that's to the left, it's interesting. Here, it really looks like the white costume is reflecting the sort of the twilight or the moonlight that it's hitting. So that's another interesting take on how to deal with a guy running around in an all white costume at night, how he's able to sneak up on people.
Yeah, I don't think he's ever been really a stealth character. That's something that I don't think people have ever made him. He's an investigator, but he doesn't really like to sneak up on people. He's sort of a bare knuckle brawler. Unlike Batman, who blends in at night, Moon Knight really isn't looking to do that. He's a brawler more than he is like a sneaker or anything like that. Like he's sort of the guy that everybody's afraid of because they don't know whether he's superpowered or not. Mm-hmm. And even he doesn't know if he's superpowered or not. But there's just so much supernatural stuff going on around him. This is more Sienkiewicz stuff, very dramatic. I think in this series, you can really see Sienkiewicz coming into his style as well, sort of moving away from the more Neil Adams, John Byrne way of penciling and inking, which those guys were his contemporaries, and moving into more of his elongated, very dramatic anatomy that he uses later in his career, like on Elektra or New Mutants even.
Yeah.
Which is really cool to see. This is still Hulk stuff, but you can sort of see Sienkiewicz's style coming out becoming more prevalent as it goes through.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
This is definitely more what people would expect from comic book art, and then definitely, as you said, when he goes to that Elektra and that New Mutants, he gets very, very experimental there.
Yeah, and you can see that I have on the spreadsheet one of our favorite Sienkiewicz pages ever, which is his 9-panel
Hmm.
grid page of Moon Knight, which is probably one of the greatest pages of this era. It's just so well done. Excuse me, very revolutionary for the time. I like this the right page right here. It's very classic Marvel. Showing off his different things. But what's cool is that maybe with the exception of the Bendis run where he has all the weapons of Spider-Man, Wolverine, and Captain America, they've pretty much stuck to the same arsenal throughout the ages. It's just the grappling hook, the baton, and throwing moons. That's it.
Which those there's always the hey, he's a poor man's Batman, but those
Yeah,
those are
yeah,
those are very those are very Batman esque tools. I guess with maybe the baton leading more to a Daredevil, but definitely
right.
the grappling hook and not a batarang, but a boomerang, moon shape. Those are definitely Batman esque.
Yeah. What I liked, again, like I said though, he's way more crazy than Batman is, and way more like he may be super powered. That's sort of what the great thing about Moon Knight is that he might be super strong or super fast, but just nobody knows. That's the thing, and he doesn't even know. He's just really good at crime fighting.
Yeah.
Um, Moving on, there's a good Sienkiewicz. Okay, there's the color of it.
Oh wow.
That's
Yeah.
very Sienkiewicz right there. Um, Beautiful pose, but again, very weirdly shaped kind of thing, like it looks correct, but there's just something off about it, And I think that's Sienkiewicz at its best, but also the buildings not being straight.
Hmm.
There's a lot of, I guess you could say, grit to these pages, There's a lot of texture, like the thin lines on the inks are just beautiful. This is Sienkiewicz to the max right here.
Yeah, and is this is a 2-page splash if I'm looking at this
Yeah.
correctly? And
Yep.
this is definitely, we've done a lot of page breakdown, but this is definitely a left to right lead your eye splash page here.
Yeah, very straightforward, very clear composition. Sienkiewicz, though, whenever we do an episode on him, he's one of the masters of page layouts,
Yeah.
especially in Elektra. Just amazing what he does with that story, especially with how confusing it is. How easy it is to read is amazing. Yeah, it's a beautiful, very well done composition. Here are the inks of the double page spread. It's beautiful silhouettes. I love the shadows against the back building right here. I love this. Love his spackles of ink right here. It's adding to the atmosphere of the city.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's
So
this is him.
with and we did a looking at these inks, and we did a creator spotlight on Sean Murphy. If
Yeah,
if these buildings were straight up and down, a little bit darker, that could definitely be a Murphy background.
you can definitely see where Murphy took from Sienkiewicz in this page. Yeah, especially with composition and shadow wise, and also like you said, texture and using the inks and the brush almost as like a painter would, and
So
it's beautiful.
So let me ask you an art question, and
Okay.
I'm not sure if you have the answer to this, but sort of like this window towards the right, where we have like heavy like flecks of something like in the
Oh, this one
distance.
right here.
Yeah, is that him just sort of like taking the nib and just sort of like uh, tapping it over top of it to get that? Do you think?
Probably, or like like how everybody uses toothbrushes. I
Okay.
use like an eyedropper, and it
Oh
works
wow.
great. I love using eyedroppers. It's a little less messy, a little more controlled. But
That's
I've seen people use brushes. When we were at Heroes Con watching, oh, what's his name, do the Jack Sparrow painting. That
Tony
was
Moore.
Tony Moore do his Jack Sparrow. He was using toothbrushes and brush spackles to get those nice little flecks to add to add atmosphere to the painting. I wouldn't
Very
be
cool.
surprised if he's doing that. He does it a lot on Elektra as well.
Cool.
It's a cool splash. I think this is probably from one of the first issues right here. Again, maybe more classic, probably belonged a little earlier, but this is Sienkiewicz's opening classic Marvel layout. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
this is I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, that's all I was going to say.
Yeah, this is, this is your awesome sort of 80s. I'm assuming this is 80s, just that sort of initial splash. Yeah. They all started off with a splash page, which was like this like almost movie poster-esque like image with some text to drop you in right here. So this we have a battle in the foreground. We got some riders coming in the midground. They're almost coming out of like a rising or setting sun, and then we have streaks of light and moonlight like coming down. So this is pretty awesome, and very very much what you would get on the first page of a 80s Marvel comic.
Oftentimes, more than not, they're better than the actual covers themselves.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is the origin of Mark Spector, is what this is setting up, with him being a mercenary in the Middle East, which has been consistent throughout. They've never changed that throughout all of Moon Knight lore. At least what I've read, they've never changed that. He's always been a mercenary, started out in the Middle East, and that's where he ended up at the foot of Khonshu's statue, where he was brought back to life. Here's some great pencils and inks, I think, from Sienkiewicz, just to show also something that's consistent with Moon Knight is how awesome the action is. It's always been for his 30-some years of doing it. Now I'm guessing over 40 years, actually, because he first arrived in 1975. But he's always had cool action sequences. And Sienkiewicz, I think, is integral in that, because Sienkiewicz knew how to draw action. And, it's something that's continued on even to the most recent run, where they get good artists to draw really good action throughout it all. So it'll have mind-bending artwork, but it'll also have really clear, really well-drawn action sequences. And these pages are so well composed. They move really well. There's a lot of panels, but it doesn't slow the story down. It's just cool.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about like how you can slow down the story or speed up the story by the size of the panel. So this top third, you get 3 very quick. It's the second row towards the right. You get like 3 very like bang bang bang.
Bam. Yep. Yeah, so, sequential stuff, heavy hitting, and then that impact. Really love that he writes a panel just to focus on the impact itself, but it's such a big impact that it breaks the panel. That's awesome.
Yeah, and so this is again where I don't want to be a person to question sort of like a master of this, but if we look at this last panel where the monster is slashing at Moon Knight. It's sort of slashing left to right. I wonder if, again, just my suggestion, I wonder if the slash going the other way to lead you to the right bottom panel would have been a better choice. But again, that's just a suggestion on my part.
Yeah, I don't know, because but the thing is that Moon Knight is in the foreground, and his movement to the right leads you off the page. So I don't think there's any right answer, because like if the monster was slashing left, Moon Knight has to move to the right and lead you off the page. But if the monster was slashing left, Moon Knight would have to be slashing right. Moon Knight would have to be moving left, which might also lead you off the page. I think it's a difficult angle to pull off.
Yeah, I see it now. I see what you're saying. Like Moon Knight is in the foreground, and he's almost falling at us and towards that edge of the page. So I can see that as well.
I think the second page has the wonky composition with this top panel, because that one is definitely moving right to left and off the page.
True.
And it doesn't, like, unless you have this line leading you in, or maybe you're doing this, but even then this leads you right off, and this has a lot of things going a lot of different places. It kind of stops me when I look at this panel. It's
So
a cool pose, but it's got weird composition for me.
yeah, so is this the page that follows the inked page that we see here, or is it
No, it's
okay?
a different issue altogether. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll get on to this one now, though. This one just being perfect. Like, oh my gosh, where to even start with this one, right? Like, it's amazing.
Yeah, this is sort of looking at it now. This is like a page that could just sort of continue forever and
Forever.
ever. Yeah,
Yeah.
it would, it would have been interesting to just. I don't think that they would do it, but imagine if they did like a 22-page comic where it was just these guys shooting at Moon Knight as he dodges, and
Yeah.
they never changed the angle of their attack. But no, this is an awesome page. So
But
I'm going to
this
turn
is
it over
just
to
one
you.
guy in the middle here, though.
Oh,
That's
okay,
what's I've read the whole issue. It's just one guy. That's
okay,
what's cool. That's what's so interesting about it is that Sienkiewicz takes a panel and sometimes he bleeds over into show each movement of this, and it shows the space of him getting closer to the camera because it's a downward angle. But this is just the one guy moving around in the center panel. And it works. That's the
yeah,
thing is that it's a really cool choice and it works. And then having these sound effects going around it as well. This is something I would love if I could find a print of it, just frame it on my wall. I would. This is just such a beautiful page.
yeah. And now that I'm looking at it, as we go, sort of in that motion, he's breaking the panel on all the panels until he stops.
Yep.
And let's see, as we go, like what would be, I guess, 6 o'clock. That's when the guy gets off his last shot, and then when we're sort of at that 7 to 8 o'clock on the clock face, this bottom left panel, he stops shooting because he's lost sight of him, and then 9 o'clock on the clock face, as Moon Knight has sort of reached his perch and is mostly out of view, he stops shooting. So you get the you get the rapid shooting around the last shot, the sort of where did he go, and then sort of like the resignation of I don't even know where he is anymore as you go
Right.
around there.
Yeah, it's a perfect page. You don't see top down enough in comics, I don't think. But when you do, because it's hard to do,
Mm-hmm.
but when it's done well, it's done really well. And this one is done really well. And I think it just sort of exemplifies Moon Knight in comics being sort of a great action comic.
Yeah.
So here we're skipping ahead a couple decades. I don't have much from the 90s or the 80s. This is from 2006. This is David Finch's artwork. And David Finch is a product of the 90s, of course, of the Jim Lee, the McFarlane, the Liefeld era Image stuff.
Yeah.
So he follows along with that sort of sensibility. But I like this Moon Knight. He's still got some weird stuff going on, like very surreal, like dark stuff. But I can't help but feel like it's sort of an audition for Batman or just Batman diet in this comic,
Yeah, this could very easily you could very easily switch out Moon Knight for Spawn there in the middle.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
barely anything would change. And he's getting a little Taskmaster-esque with the
Right.
with the peak of the hood up top there.
Funny you mentioned Taskmaster because then right there,
Okay.
that's pretty obviously I think Moon Knight fights Taskmaster in this series, or I think that might be Moon Knight actually. No, I think it's Taskmaster.
No, yeah, he's definitely more skeletal
Yeah.
in the face, yeah, and the sword would, yeah. So
Yeah, so Taskmaster, he's got the T on his belt, duh. But yeah, so Taskmaster does fight Moon Knight in this series, and so it's got. I have not read this series, but I do love this artwork because I like David Finch a lot.
oh
He's
yeah,
got so many lines on all his pages, and it's. I think the Spawn capes kind of work to the benefit of this art because it's very surreal. Within the book as well, like this is like the cape flowiness is very um, is very like it moves with like how it fits with Moon Knight's thematic shapes and stuff like that, because Moon Knight's very theatrical with how his silhouette works.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense for his cape really not to obey any laws of physics, and just to sort of move on its own volition. And it seems like Taskmasters does the same here, which adds a very dreamlike, surreal quality to the artwork. Very hyper detailed. Like, look at this, the lines coming off of it right here
Yeah.
at the top of the corner. Like, he had to draw in all those white lines on top of all this glass shattering as well. It's a nightmare to think about drawing all that. Yeah, but I like this artwork still, especially this right here. I like this. I like the colors on this. This looks almost like not Ponsor, but one of those guys, doing the colors on it. And he does a good job of contrasting Spidey and Moon Knight. I was about to call him Spawn because I still got Spawn in my mind, but yeah, it's I think it's okay. What is your opinion on David Finch's take on Moon Knight as a character?
I like it. It's hard to be critical of it and say it's a product of its time, but you're influenced by what you're seeing, and
right.
You don't know how much of a mandate might have been coming down that, hey, this stuff is selling. Let's do this. What is interesting here, and we've talked about sort of the white, the blue. He's very much gray here. So it's another way. He's street level here, which he can be a street level hero. So he's grim and gritty. He blends into the sort of the alleyway that they have here. So again, it's another color choice with that white, mostly white uniform.
Yeah, and I guess I don't know much about this series. I'm interested to find it and pick it up and read it because I am interesting. And now we're going to jump ahead again.
Okay.
I think Mark Guggenheim may have written Moon Knight at one point before Bendis even did. Or maybe I'm getting mixed up with someone else. I don't know. Then now we're into the Bendis Malieve run, where this is, I think, the first issue where Moon Knight's teamed up with Cap, Wolverine, and Spider-Man in Los Angeles to fight Bullseye and some weapons dealers. Yeah. And then you find out that they've become his new alternate personalities. This one, I think, this is sort of my earliest like full run of Moon Knight that I've read, which isn't saying much about. I love the character, but this is as far back as I go. He here, I mean, is nuts, and this book really plays with the confines of reality. The whole time they're filming a movie about Mark Spector's life as the backdrop of this of this series. So it's always going back and forth as like, you don't know what's really happened or what. This is your intro to Moon Knight. You don't know what's true about him. You just know he's crazy. And it's a great book. It's really sad too. It's surprisingly sad, surprisingly dark, but at the same time, surprisingly funny as well at times. I mean, they really play up the comedy with Cap, Wolverine, and Spider-Man.
Yeah, this is interesting looking at this. I read this, but I haven't revisited it in a while. And this art style by Malieve is not quite as painterly as he has now. This is almost like a combination of Malieve and Linnell Francis Yu put together here. So this is cool to revisit.
Yeah, but it's also got that blockiness that I really like, that Malieve does really well, where everything feels very sharp and it still has some painterly qualities to it, but it almost reminds me of later Sienkiewicz stuff. Not what we were looking at with Moon Knight before, but this sort of seems very inspired by like New Mutants, Elektra, 30 Days of Night, sort of Sienkiewicz things. Yeah, this is some pretty cool stuff. Here's some more Moon Knight centric stuff from that series. Of course, Wolverine's in the top, but Moon Knight's always battling with his different personalities, trying to compromise his morality. So
Mhm.
he can be the character that's I'll never kill, and then in the next issue he'll be like just killing people or criminals. I mean, not just people, but criminals.
Yeah.
And this book is all about that too. He has three personalities. He has the three superheroes, basically with all three different moral codes. And Wolverine's the one that's always telling him to kill people. So that's what this first page is about. But it's still got, yeah, I thought this was just a great Maleev page, but it's very surreal where his hood sort of blends into the back of his cape. I like the playing around with the silhouette here, and I like his hatching, sort of the grading of his hatching going into full black as it silhouettes against the moon. I really like that. And I like the pose. Again, it's sort of more realistic than what we were seeing with Sienkiewicz.
Hmm.
But I like the design, again, the design choices to be more abstract with how his folds work in his cape and how the shapes that it creates is pretty great. I also love how the buildings in the background are rendered with their shadows. It's a great page, I think. What do you think of it?
Yeah, I do really like it. As you were talking, and you brought up the really good point of sort of the three characters that he thinks that he's working with, um, Cap, Wolverine, and Spider-Man. Definitely, Cap and Wolverine would be in like different sides of the spectrum on how to handle these questions. But I'm wondering about the choice of Spider-Man being the third. Just sort of thinking about this as sort of like a creative project, like because he's going to be very much at that, very close to Cap's way of dealing with it. I wonder if an interesting choice would have been to pick somebody more in the middle. And I'm
Mm.
just trying to think about who that would be. Like, yeah, I mean,
Well, there's
you
yeah.
wouldn't go Punisher because Punisher and Wolverine would just be like, take
Yeah.
everybody out. But I'm just wondering about a different choice other than Spider-Man.
Yeah, I don't know. The book is definitely trying to set up the ego, the super ego, and the id. The very Freudian way of like having three different personas inside you.
Hmm.
Wolverine's the id, Captain America's the super ego, and Spider-Man's the ego. So Spider-Man doesn't want Cap and Wolverine to fight throughout the whole series. He's always the moderator trying to get them to stop. So he's the ego, you know, and Cap is the super ego where he's only good, and Wolverine's the id where he's just giving into every impulse where he's like, yeah. And Wolverine and Moon Knight's really pushed to his limits in this book, physically and emotionally, mentally, morally. It's like a really intense book throughout the whole thing, but with the crazy, like hilarious backdrop of him just losing his mind the whole time. Yeah,
Okay, so I'm actually reversing course. I think that Spider-Man is the right choice because
yeah,
he's sort of like the he's sort of like the soul of the Marvel universe, where Cap is sort of like the ideal that you would try to achieve and live up to. Where Spider-Man is just sort of like I said, he's the soul. He's like
yeah.
just sort of like the center point of everything. So that does make sense. So I'm reversing course on my earlier statements. I do think that now talking it through, I think that was the best choice to make.
I think so too. He's the heart and soul of the Marvel universe, but you
Yeah.
have Cap being sort of like the first Marvel character of the the first and best Marvel character of the Silver Age, right?
Hmm.
Then you have Cap being the first of the Golden Age. I mean,
Yeah.
Spider-Man being the best of the Silver Age, and then Wolverine being the best of the Bronze Age. I didn't get that until now. That
Yeah.
kind of
That's
thing.
yeah.
Um, yeah. So then this is just a cool page. I thought Maleev playing with the silhouette of the cape to use it as composition in both the first and third panel of this section of this page. This also works in. This has always been the thing is that Moon Knight's never really been that kind of Batman character where he's sometimes not on the side of the law and sometimes he is on the side of the law. For the
Hmm.
most part, Moon Knight's on the side of the law. Like he's actually most of the time, like he works pretty in like they bring him in to help with police cases and whatnot. Um, This book does that especially. I think there's a little bit of the fugitive narrative where they think maybe he's a murderer, but he works pretty well. Again, you have this great, I think this upper panel is awesome. I like that he doesn't draw the silhouette, like doesn't outline where the hood begins and where the cape ends,
Yeah, that is cool.
Just blends together. And I like how the cape on the bottom panel just sort of flows in this nice composition and like a nice circular composition, but also leads your eye off the page.
Yeah.
Just Malieve doing multiple things at once. It's really great. Now we're moving into Shalvey and Warren Ellis's run, which is surreal to say the least.
Definitely.
But this is the best issue of the run, where it's just an action sequence throughout the whole thing. And this is where Moon Knight sort of breaks away from just the typical costume with the cape and the hood, and he moves into having multiple costumes to fit multiple personas. So he has the classic Moon Knight costume, with little updates. Then he has the Khonshu costume where he wears the bird skull and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then he has Mr. Knight, and all of them have different personalities to match his different personalities inside of his brain. And Mr. Knight is suave at times, but he's also more brutal at other times as well, and especially in this issue.
Yeah, and this is what we talked about earlier, where he's very much a figure in white that stands out more.
Yes.
Where he definitely was muted at times, reflecting the environment that he was in. Here, he is a stark white contrast against everything.
Yeah, Jordi Belaire's colors on this series, and then she's colored, I think, everything up until the Max Bemis and Jason Burrows run.
Mm-hmm.
Her colors are impeccably beautiful on this series. A lot of flats, which is great, just great design elements. And it works with Declan Shalvey because he uses ink washes, and you can see that on different characters' stuff. So there's ink wash rendering these guys where he just decides to go with a simple black and white rendering of Moon Knight, which is great. The action, this whole issue, Shalvey goes for a very simple, nice layout of the pages to keep the action moving along. You could probably read this issue in less than 5 minutes. It's just so easy to read, and it's so much fun. The whole fight sequence.
This is the one where it's sort of like a video game where he goes up, and each level he takes on like a boss battle. Yeah, this was definitely a cool issue.
Yeah, and this is the next page. This is the same page, just the rest of it. I wanted to highlight it just because I could have done the whole issue because I love every bit of it, but I just decided on this one page because it's just so great. This book is pretty brutal, I think. Like it gets in, and I think the one Malieve and Bendis's book is pretty brutal as well, and it kind of gets into the like Moon Knight isn't Daredevil or even Punisher dark, but he's up there. Like he's not soft whatsoever with the violence and the dark subject material in these books.
Yeah, and I like this is the first when he's striking this guy. Actually, no, I take it back. We get the first sort of glimpse of his skin in the middle panel and that little break in the glove, and then we see more of it. So that's an interesting coloring choice to let us know that there's a person underneath that crazy all white costume.
And from here on out, Bendis's run more has to deal with how Moon Knight wants to fight crime, sort of balancing his craziness. This one is about he's definitely crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. We definitely don't know what things are real, but we also that's sort of maybe actually more of the focus is like what is real, what's not real, and whether like Moon Knight is a god or not, part god. Like he's sort of Khonshu, one of the personalities in his mind is the Egyptian god, telling him that he is one, that he is that he is a god, but he doesn't know because he can be injured and stuff like that and almost killed. But there's a lot more going on that we know about. Warren Ellis wrote the first 5 issues of Declan Shalvey, and then Brian Wood and Greg Smallwood did the second 5 issues. Okay. And then I think, let me look at it really quick.
Is it Lemire afterwards?
No, actually, then it's then it's Cullen Bunn after that.
Okay.
And it's Cullen Bunn finishes off that 15 issue arc, and then that leads into the Lemire. Ron Atkins and German Peralta are the next two with Cullen Bunn after Brian Wood and Greg Smallwood. Then Jeff Lemire starts up. This is some of the other stuff though with Shalvey. This is just to contrast with like how tight these panels are, you know? And then Shalvey has this whole issue where it's just surreal and he's switching between personalities. So he starts off as Mr. Knight and he switches into Moon Knight personalities and he's going in through this like psyche, this like really like mind trippy, all my like altering reality stuff. And you can definitely see also where Warren Ellis and Shalvey return to a lot of this stuff in Injection. Injection is also very much so laid out like this, where it'll have panels that are very structured like this, and then they'll enter into another realm and it'll be less structured, where the panels will be bleeding over into other panels, and some of the panels won't even be like perfect squares or anything like that, or perfectly sized up, and you have all these like angles that are very straight on here but on its side here, and it's very disorienting. Those whole 5 issues are very disorienting in just how they switch back and forth the whole time.
Okay. Yeah, these are very cool pages.
Yeah. Then some more Shalvey stuff just to show again maybe how he draws Moon Knight to really contrast against the background. Here's him working with the detectives again, pretty close in hand. Moon Knight has these great shadows that render him and make him 3-dimensional, but not nearly as rendered as the people in the darks, medium grays, and lights where there's a nice gradation, but Moon Knight is very stark in contrast. And also like how Maliv drew him, where like certain lines are missing, he just sort of blends into a silhouette. There's a lot of that going on here too. But in a moment where like he's really intense, you can see all these great details coming out of his mask right here.
Yeah.
It's just a great run. It's got such great art from Shalvey, probably some of his best, if not his best. Love this last panel right here, just furthering that Moon Knight is his own thing. He's his own entity that sort of walks outside of what all is going on.
Yeah. And then that was, he's silhouetted in that last panel, which is, just another way to use that, where he's all white here. Just a way to use that a little differently in that last panel. Yeah.
And what's cool about the Mr. Knight persona is that he's more street level. Like he is a street level, superhero, but like to really distinguish him from Batman is to have these 3 personas with the 3 different costumes that represent not just different fight sequences or whatever. Like, Batman will have his ice suit and his fire suit and all that kind of stuff, along with his regular suit. But this time, it's more about street function for Moon Knight. Sometimes if he really has to be theatrical, he'll wear his more caped thing. But then, if it's something where he has to meet with police officers, he dresses as Mr. Knight. And if he's doing more hand-to-hand ground level stuff, he'll dress as Mr. Knight from here on out.
Cool.
That continues into the Lemire stuff, which is just all it is based on just what's real, what's not real, is everything that Moon Knight. It takes everything as continuity in the Lemire run, and nothing as continuity because it all could be just in his mind. So all of the Lemire run takes place, for what we know, inside Mark Spector's mind.
So this is just a thought I had here. I wonder how much of working on this Moon Knight went into some of Lemire's thinking in Gideon Falls, where you have a lot of, is this really happening? Is this not really happening? So, that would be cool if we could ever talk to Jeff Lemire to say, hey, you did this whole run on Moon Knight where there's a lot of this, is this really happening? Is this a dream? And then you do get a lot of that in Gideon Falls.
Right.
That's a cool theme that's sort of between these two.
And that's also just Lemire in general, because even his art stuff, he does that. With After Death with Scott Snyder, that whole book is about that kind of stuff, just questioning what's real and what's manufactured by, I don't know, either mental illness or everyone around you, which Moon Knight's all about too, because it could be just Mark's mental illness, but it could also be a grand conspiracy by some villain or the god Khonshu himself. So I love, but in throughout, even in his Brian Wood run, Smallwood plays a lot with panels and how they work on the page. This is basically an exclamation mark, and it's great. Mm-hmm. And Smallwood went on to this right after he would basically broken into comics with Dream Thief, which did a lot of the same sort of really crazy panel stuff, a lot of playing with reality, what's real, what's not real. Who do you trust? Who do you not trust? A lot of that happens in Dream Thief, and I'm wondering if Brian Wood was like, "Hey, you need to get this guy on Moon Knight," because right after Dream Thief, actually in the middle of Dream Thief, Smallwood jumped ship and went to Moon Knight, which he was a perfect fit for him, especially with what he was doing on that book. Mostly playing with just sort of like really photorealistic artwork mixed with these just wild and crazy panel layout designs. Love how the sound effects play into, the panel design as well on this second page up here.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah. Jordi Belair on colors again. She does a great job with more textured artists. Her flats play really well with that. Again, more crazy panel layouts, really expressive colors from Jordi Belair, really cool shapes created on both, just it's almost abstract art, pop art. Yeah, it's amazing. Excuse me. Here you see him fighting with one of his personas, which he has to do a lot throughout the whole series. This is, the Mr. Knight fighting with Moon Knight persona. A lot of it is basically just him trying to basically kill all his personas so he can know what's real by the end.
Which is sort of, the mental battle he's having in his head is somewhat playing out, physically here. So that's just sort of, he's battling all these demons in his head, and then it's being represented on the page that he's also, in physical confrontation with them as well.
Yeah, and this one on the left is from the Lemire Smallwood run. Okay. On the right, this is from the Brian Wood Smallwood run. But again, just to show you, Smallwood was not shying away throughout his whole runs with just crazy panel layouts and cool ways of telling the story in micro panels, but in panels that make up one solid image. It's just cool to see his composition. We'll have to do an artist spotlight on him as well, just to talk about his work, because his work is amazing.
Yeah.
Here's more craziness. This is Lemire and Smallwood over here, getting into a very Sienkiewicz here, which is really cool to see. Beautiful again, but colors by Jordi Belair. She does a great job working with, like I said, just really textured artists. It's amazing work, very surreal. Each book, like the Malieve and Bendis book, where, first issue starts with a twist that, Spider-Man, Captain America, Wolverine are all in his head. Each issue would end with something like this at the end of it, and it has been since. There's always a twist at the end. The Warren Ellis and Shalvey run, and even into the Smallwood and Brian Wood run and the Cullen Bunn run, each issue was a separate adventure, but there was an overarching story going on with Moon Knight's therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Here, Jeff Lemire's run is one solid narrative throughout 15 issues, like maybe it was probably like around 15 issues. And then but at the end you have these great reveals of the next step in his journey, like this right here, him being outside the temple, but also it's outside of reality.
So this is this painted image. This is Smallwood here.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, that's Smallwood. Even though it looks a lot like Sienkiewicz.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I do remember, and we may not have it here, but if we don't, I will put it. I'll put an example of it. But like, there's a part where it gets really crazy in this, where Moon Knight is like, uh, believes he's on the moon, like
Yeah.
fighting like werewolves and spaceships, and they go to James Stokoe to like
Yep.
do those pages. So they really play with the changing time frames, the changing worlds, the changing scenarios by using different artists to represent that in this issue, or I'm sorry, in this series.
Yeah. So this the second page on that is from the first arc of Jeff Lemire's run.
Okay.
But then this is from the final one of the final issues right here on the left, where he finally gets to confront Khonshu. And over here is from one of those issues in the middle.
Okay.
The one you're talking about is this issue right here, number 10, where throughout that arc, that's in the second trade, if anyone's looking for it. Yeah, like Wilfred Torres comes on, Francesco Francavilla comes on, James Stokoe comes on. They all do a different persona of Moon Knight. So yeah, there's like space battles. Yeah, there's a werewolf battle. There's like crime stuff with Jake Lockley, who's the taxi driver.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. It's one of the it's Jeff Lemire writing to each artist's strength, and it's really impressive to see that from a writer.
Yeah, that's really like one of the interesting ways that you can do storytelling with comics is to change the artist, to change the style and the environment. Like it would be more difficult to, I guess, maybe do that in a movie, but you can easily do that in comics.
Yeah, and that's something I remember telling Rebecca after I was finished reading that trade. I was like, this is something you could only do in comics, is something where you switch genres and artists at the same time and it fits in with one solid narrative. Like, that's just impressive.
Yeah.
Something really inspiring. I know Alish Kut does that in Zero.
Mm-hmm.
Where each issue is a different artist, but it's still at the same time, and it plays to each artist's sensibilities and style, but it also it moves the story along and expands the world, while also each issue feels different from the other one. It's something mind bending, but again, like, you can only know how it works by reading it. Yeah, great stuff. Now, this is the most recent run. I think some of the best art. He had a lot of other Max Bemis had a lot of other artists on there, including Bill Sienkiewicz returning to it as well.
Oh wow.
He came back and he did some stuff, just some little insert stuff and later issues, but this is from the first arc, which is really great. Max Bemis and Jason Burrows did this whole first arc, and Jason Burrows came back later and did other issues as well. It's a really short run, I think maybe 14 issues. It was really great. It was 2017 to last year. It's really awesome. Tells a story that, like, again, expanding on whether or not, Moon Knight's everything that he knows is all based in mental illness, or if it is reality.
Mm-hmm.
This page on the side is just if it's based in reality, that means there's been this ancient battle between the Herald of Khonshu and the Herald of Ra throughout centuries. So that's what this is all about, and it's really hilarious. It's so much fun. And you have this character who is completely mentally unstable, but he believes he's the Herald of Ra, and he has pyrokinesis. So he can start fires with his mind, but he's also crazy and believes he's imbued with the power of God, of Ra. Mm-hmm. And him and Moon Knight, just like, fights are great. Jason Burrows, I think, was fresh off of working on Providence, with Alan Moore. So he brought a lot of that surreal sort of surreal imagery, but with like very clear storytelling to this book. And also it's very dark, but it's got that weird whimsy to it that even like it does, like Providence and the Neonomicon has, Not nearly as dark, of course, but it's got that weird. Like Jason Burrows clearly has a weird sense of humor with how he does stuff.
Yeah.
It fits with Moon Knight really well. This is a great page. Again, just great layout, going along with the legacy of Moon Knight, just having crazy action, but having it be told in crazy ways with very interesting composition. Like you'll notice, yeah, just this great momentum here.
Yeah, this is not quite the 9-panel circular grid, but this is reminiscent of it, where
Very,
he's moving from the back of the boat to the front. So very
yeah.
cool.
I watched an interview with Trad Moore earlier this week that he did on Strip Panel Naked, where he talked about his stuff on Ghost Rider,
Okay.
and he's not a fan of doing the like one figure is like lighter than the other, like in classic Marvel comics, right? Where if you're showing Spider-Man leaping across the page, the one in the foreground is the one that's rendered the most, and all the other ones are sort of like lightly colored, so you can tell that it's just moving along. But here, the colorist and the artist trust the reader enough to know that there are not like 15 Moon Knights fighting at once. It's just Moon Knight moving across the page.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I like that. I always like to see that in books. And earlier, Sienkiewicz did that on his page as well, which I really like. And, it's great to see a comic from that era do that sort of thing. And that's what I have. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think we did a very good deep dive here. We went through a lot of stuff. So
Yeah, definitely.
uh, I think we're gonna bring this to an end here. Do you have any final thoughts you want to bring, or do you feel that going through these you've covered most of what you wanted to say?
I think I've covered most of what I wanted to say. It's great to go through. I love Moon Knight mainly just because of the talent attached to it over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, if you read from the Bendis Malieve run to the current run, you won't be disappointed. It's just good story and different stories too. Like I said at the beginning, this character really lends from a lot of experimentation, a lot of genre bending, a lot of like just crazy stuff. If you're a fan of surreal comics, if you're a fan of action comics, if you're a fan of horror comics, there's a little bit of everything in there.
Cool. All right. So I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in and joining us here. I am going to let everybody know that I'm going to post this on our YouTube channel, which is Constructing Comics. This was one of more of our visually filled episodes. We'll definitely be sharing these images on our Twitter, which is at ConstructCompod, on our Instagram page, which is Constructing Comics. Constructing Comics Pod, and our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/constructing comics. But if you really want to get the entire experience, I would suggest going over to that YouTube channel where we'll post the video to this. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us, and we will be back very soon with another episode. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.